Okay, I already tried to film this once, but the volume of the game was too loud relative to the sound of my voice, so the game kind of drowned out the audio. I also got a little too distracted running around fighting stuff and got off topic a little bit. But I want to make a video where I talk about Satisfactory and how I've beaten the game finally for the first time, and I kind of learned a lot from doing so, and I want to make this video primarily to help people who are stuck in Phase 4, because I was stuck in Phase 4 for a very long time. I had two 200-hour save files that I burned out on about 6 months ago after the game came out in 1.0. Or it came out like 8 months ago, but I played it for 2 months. I put 400 hours into the game in a month and a half or 2 months, and then burned out on it before beating it, and came back after Experimental dropped, Experimental 1.1, and I've mostly been just playing it really fast and doing things I normally wouldn't do or consider proper to do, because I thought, hey, it's Experimental anyway, why not just play the game real fast and try to beat it, just so that I can knock it out and say that I've beaten it, so that whenever I do burn out on it again, like I always do, I'll be able to come back and play it properly whenever 1.1 stable comes out. That was the plan. Things are not going according to plan, but this time it's not because I'm burning out, it's because I'm actually not burning out for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and walk around my world for a little bit. Since I did beat the game, and this is a Satisfactory video, I know some people would be interested in potentially seeing the factory I beat the game with. I'll go ahead and do that, but I mostly want to talk about my experience with beating the game, what I learned from beating the game, and try to share some advice that I think would help people who are stuck on Phase 4 get unstuck. So here's the first bit of advice that you can't really learn unless you actually beat the game yourself that's kind of important. Phase 5 is really, really fucking easy. So if you're feeling frustrated because you're still in Phase 4 and you think, man, this is really hard and there's a whole nother phase after this, I just want to let you know that there really isn't a whole nother phase after Phase 4, because Phase 4 is really hard and Phase 5 is really easy. Like, I consider it to be easier than Phase 2. That's how easy it is. Now, that is mostly because by the time you make it to Phase 5, you are good enough at the game that it makes Phase 2 feel comparatively easier, but there is also an element of a lot of the stuff that's added in Phase 5 is just really easy, and the complexity of Phase 5 comes from making sure you set up your factory properly in Phase 4. If you set up your factory properly in Phase 4, Phase 5 will be easy, but if you didn't, Phase 5 will be hard, not because Phase 5 is hard, but because it relies on Phase 4 being done properly, and Phase 4 is really hard. But Phase 5 itself, actually really easy. A lot of the stuff that they add, like the Mark 6 belts here, these are easier to set up than the Mark 5 belt was, and you know, pretty easy. So if you're feeling frustrated, don't worry. If you get Phase 4 right, that is pretty much the end of the game. Phase 4, I would say, is about 85 to 90% of the way through the game, and then Phase 5 is just like a nice little cherry on top that is very quick to knock out, especially if you spend a lot of time on Phase 3 and 4. This is the aluminum setup, by the way. I kind of stopped trying to make things look good, and it's kind of a bit of a mess. It is making the electrode scrap recipe with the sloppy aluminum recipe. I had to eventually come over here and fix some stuff. That's the wet concrete that's sinking the water. I was trying to recycle the water. Not really worth it. I don't think I'm going to try to recycle water because the fluid mechanics are a little too finicky, and I just rather not. I ended up having to set up wet concrete for it to get it to work. We're over here in the swamp, a nice little temporary, quote-unquote temporary aluminum setup. I did eventually spaghetti kind of some drones into it with some nitro rocket fuel with that sulfur and coal that I showed earlier. That is supplying the necessary rocket fuel production, nitro rocket fuel, to get drone fuel being packaged with the aluminum, I guess they're called tanks, the aluminum tanks, packaging rocket fuel to be consumed by drones so that I can take casings and even some aluminum sheets back to the starter base so that I could make fuse modular frames and radio control units and all the good stuff that you need to beat the game. And that's quite important because the key to beating Phase 4 is taking the products from your aluminum factory and actually taking them back to your starter factory to turn them into the Phase 4 parts. Because if you can get a fully automated setup for fused modular frames, radio control units, turbo motors, cooling systems also, I was able to do it without cooling systems and had to go back and add cooling systems because you actually need cooling systems to build the Tier 5 or the Tier 9 buildings that you unlock in Phase 5. So you will need fully automated cooling systems, so just a heads up on that. If you get the turbo electric motor alt like I did, you don't need to automate cooling systems in Phase 4, but it is actually quite helpful to have them, so I would recommend it. Fully automating cooling systems. I recommend fully automating everything, but some things don't need to be fully automated. Or at least they don't need to be fully automated by themselves. Like, you don't need circuit boards, I don't think, for anything, but they are used to unlock some stuff. So it's nice to have some extra. So anyway, I did beat the game. I eventually just started spaghettiing my way through the game. I was kind of trying to take my time near the beginning, not necessarily to build aesthetic setups, but to at least build neat and organized setups. And I spent maybe 100 hours getting to and through Phase 3, and then maybe 80 hours getting through Phase 4 alone, because Phase 4 obviously is the grunt of the game. I would even say that Phase 4 just is the game, and everything before it's the intro, and Phase 4 is the actual game, and then Phase 5 is kind of just not even a post-game, it's more like a bonus level. The way I like to think of it is that Phase 5 is the test to see if you played the game not correctly, but if you played the game well enough to set yourself up for victory. You kind of have to do it. I can imagine Phase 5 being very difficult for somebody who just box fed or bought things from the Awesome Shop to unlock everything. That would definitely cause Phase 5 to feel kind of a pain, but that's only because you didn't do Phase 4, not because Phase 5 itself is hard. If you did Phase 4 at all, not even properly, just at all, if you did Phase 4, if you have fully automated the stuff that's introduced in Phase 4, you will have an easy time in Phase 5, depending on how high your spaghetti tolerance is, because I'm trying to get to the starter base. You will very clearly see that my spaghetti tolerance seems to be higher than even I thought it was. So I think I'm kind of going in reverse order, because I started at the final build, which is the aluminum factory with all the drones, and I'm kind of making my way towards, or I'm trying to head my way towards, I'm going a little bit the wrong way, the crystal oscillator factory, where I turn crystal oscillators, aluminum casings, and crystal computers into radio control units, which is kind of a critical resource to automate because it's needed in a lot of components, as well as drone ports and drones, and drone ports and drones are very critical to solving late game logistics, in my opinion. So my general advice to anybody who's playing Phase 4 is you do have to solve the problems of Phase 4. You can't really just temporary your way out of it. And when I say temporary your way out of it, I mean you can't just box feed everything forever. You do need to fully automate some things, because even if you box feed the elevator like I do, you still need to have a source of the items that you need to put in the boxes. And some of the items you can't really get in high enough quantities to do that unless you automate it. Like, you're not going to get enough radio control units to make enough turbo motors to make enough thermal propulsion rockets to make enough ballistic warp drives without having some sort of production for those things. And if you do box feed it, you have to make sure you box feed a large supply of them all at once and not just do exactly the number you need in the moment. Like, that's another key piece of advice is, if you're going to box feed the elevator, make sure you generate enough elevator parts for future phases as well. You can kind of look ahead and see how many you're going to need and then generate enough elevator parts for the later tiers as well. Trying to make my way up to this crystal oscillator factory. So I found that the thing that was holding me back the most was my inability to apply long-distance logistics in the middle of the game. So what that means is there comes a point in the game where you feel the need to use trains, and that's the point of the game where people fall off, because either people don't learn how to use trains or want to use trains, or people don't want to deal with the complication that the systems that require that bring about. And what that means is there comes a point where the recipes are so complicated that you need so many things that eventually you're going to have to move things between factories, like this is doing, in order to be able to continue producing them. Like crystal oscillators, for instance, that's what this whole factory is centered around, is the production of crystal oscillators. Need reinforced iron plate and cable for the recipe I'm using, and I'm producing those over there, sending them over a train, and unloading them here just so that I can turn them into one product. There isn't really anywhere on the map that I have found where you can easily, at least, get all of the products just from nearby nodes, so you do have to start transporting some stuff around. And even if you don't have to do it for crystal oscillators specifically, you do have to do it for other products, because there just isn't anywhere on the map where you can easily get everything nearby. And that is relative, because if you like using large conveyor buses, you can technically conveyor bus all of the raw materials you need to beat the game into one location and build a massive mega base. If you want your computer to last more than a couple of years, you probably don't want to do it that way, but you can definitely do it. But the thing that really holds most people back from getting through the game comes from not being either willing or able to set up long-distance logistics so that you can have factories that interdepend on each other's outputs to be able to continue automation. You need to be able to take something you make in one factory and use it in another factory. That is, I completely forgot about that. That's a temporary dark matter crystal production that I needed for completing the game, and I haven't torn it down yet. That's still up there. That's funny. But as you make it further into the game, you are going to realize that the complexity, the thing that fills you with dread and makes you not want to continue playing, mostly stems from needing to build something that has a lot of crafting requirements. And the thing that makes that difficult isn't necessarily the number of inputs and outputs, it's where those inputs and outputs come from. Because the reinforced iron plates needed for that crystal oscillator are not hard. That's one of the first things you learn how to automate in the game. You need them to build constructors, the easiest and simplest building to make in the game. So reinforced iron plates are not hard. It's just, how do you get reinforced iron plates to where the crystal is so that you can make the crystal oscillators? And then it starts to snowball, because the crystal oscillators are then needed in RCUs and the or at least the components. I think it's crystal oscillators, computers, and aluminum casings for the recipe I'm using. So you can solve some of these by using the correct alternate recipes to simplify the amount of stuff you have to transport, but eventually you still have to solve the problem of transporting things, like from this factory. I built this factory a while back, and what this factory does is it just takes iron, copper. Technically, it just uses the iron and the copper from these nodes by the coal hole, and they bring them up via this conveyor bus. This is when I was still trying to make things look neat, and I actually kind of like the way this looks. And it takes it purifies the ingots using the pure ingot recipe, and it turns it into around 150 or so reinforced iron plate a minute, and then sends it via train along the sky over to a single factory that takes the cable and the copper sheets and the reinforced iron plate that this place makes, and it turns it into crystal oscillators, and then eventually it imports via drone the aluminum casing so they can make RCUs, and then it sends the RCUs via drone to the main base, where that gets turned into turbo motors and pressure conversion cubes, which are I'm no longer making because I stopped making nuclear pasta after I beat the game. But you eventually just have to start taking stuff that you build and sending it to other factories. If you don't, it's going to make you feel like you're going to burn out because you don't know what to do, and it's mostly because the weight of what you have to do is pretty high, because you start feeling the pressure. I need to build this. Oh great, this needs a motor. I don't have any motors. That means I need to build a whole factory that makes just motors just for this one thing, and then it starts to snowball. So the best advice that somebody can give for getting through Phase 4 is you have to take the time to set up some logistics so that you can get things from one place to another, and that's what helps solve the problem. Because like this, I felt pretty accomplished about building this at the beginning of the game. It's a coal power plant that makes 6 gigawatts of power, and I built it in Phase 3 with the Mark IV belt so that I can take 4 normal nodes of coal here in the coal hole and use max overclocked Mark II miners to get 300 coal per minute, and it builds 6 gigawatts of really overbuilt coal power. And I was able to put this off until I had Mark IV belts, because I had alien power augmenters from running around crash sites and picking stuff up and unlocking stuff early. So I was able to build a really big overbuilt coal power plant. But no matter how big and overbuilt your factories are and how cool they look, I do like the way this turned out, having a really big overbuilt coal power plant in phase 2 or phase 3 is not going to help solve the problem of how do you get aluminum casings to your reinforced iron plates and crystal oscillators and all this other stuff to make radio control units. You do have to move on from overbuilding simple builds to building the builds that actually make the things you need to beat the game. So even only making like 6 radio control units, I think I'm actually making 12 radio control units per minute, something like that. I think I'm making 12 radio control units per minute, like 30 crystal oscillators per minute, and 15 crystal computers per minute. I think I have an excess of maybe 15 crystal oscillators per minute. And then those 15 crystal oscillators a minute are being used to make 12 radio control units per minute, and I have like 3 crystal oscillators left over, something like that. But most of my starter factory stuff isn't even being used to make syncable stuff, so it doesn't really matter. As long as it can accumulate in a box, I can use it. Eventually you have to move on from the beginning of the game where you can just find what you need laying around next to the factory. Like, here's some nodes. I'm going to turn these nodes into something that requires it. You have to get to a point where you can take stuff that you're making in factories and move those between factories to make bigger stuff. Like my oil power plant, which is over there. It's using oil to make diluted fuel, and then it's using the byproduct to make rubber and plastic, and then I'm sending the rubber and plastic to this train station right here. These 3 right here are just for show. There's nothing being imported into them because I never got to that point. I have rubber, plastic, and fabric, and I'm not using the fabric for anything yet. And that rubber and plastic goes along this conveyor bus to this factory, and it's making the electronics. But the only reason why this electronics factory is even possible is because it's receiving rubber and plastic from a train line that's taking it from an oil processing facility. And this is the main factory. I'm going to show that later. Right now I want to show you the diluted fuel power plant. So if you want to be able to make it past the mid-game hump, if you want to be able to make it through phase 4, and if you want to be able to complete the game, one of the things that I was doing that was really hurting my ability to do it was I kept starting over. And starting over is fine, but if you start over, you have to go through the beginning of the game again, and the problem solving you learn from the beginning of the game doesn't really help you solve the problems that keep you from beating phase 4. Because phase 4, the reason why you can't beat phase 4 doesn't have anything to do with your inability to find a node and turn that node into stuff. It has everything to do with not being able to take the things you are making from the stuff that you're turning those nodes into and coordinating them together to make more complicated things. Each phase adds a new layer of complexity on top of what the previous phase did. Phase 1, the very beginning of the phase, you basically just get the tools necessary to build smelting columns because you gain splitters and mergers. So you gain the ability to take the stuff from a node and split it up, smelt it into a bunch of stuff, and then remerge it so that you can use that to make stuff. And then you have simple stuff like making iron plates and iron rods in phase 1. Phase 2 adds on to the complexity of phase 1 by giving you more complicated things to build with the phase 1 components that you make. And then phase 1 and 2 are kind of similar, but then phase 3 gives you the manufacturer. So now you add a literal layer of complexity by giving you the ability to turn more than 2 items at once into a product. And then phase 4 adds things like blenders. So now you're taking multiple components that are made in manufacturers and combining them with fluids to make even more advanced things. And it just keeps snowballing. Each phase adds more complexity. And then phase 5, of course, is easy because it just adds some new special alien magic bullshit to your already complicated stuff you did from phase 4, so that's not that difficult. This is a 60 gigawatt diluted fuel power plant. That coal plant I showed was only 6 gigawatts, but still, these are both incredibly overbuilt power plants. Here's another piece of general advice. You don't really need more than diluted fuel. Like these 4 oil nodes on the Golden Coast produce 1,800 oil per minute, and you can turn 1,800 oil per minute in these refineries into 2,400 heavy oil residue per minute, and then dilute that with water to make 4,800 fuel per minute, and 4,800 fuel per minute burns into 60 gigawatts, and 60 gigawatts combined with the 6 gigawatts from my coal plant and the 2 alien power augmenters that I have currently set up provide 80,000. I think I have 80 gigawatts. If I go over here and I show you from the power pole, I have 80,400 megawatts, which is 80 gigawatts of power. So 80 gigawatts of power, as it turned out, was pretty much a perfect amount of power to beat the game with. So if you want to build a power plant more complicated than a diluted fuel power plant, you can. It's mostly just done for bonus points because it's not necessary at all. It literally, you don't need it. You can build it, but you don't need it. So if you're just trying to beat the game and you think I need a power plant, I have to build a nuclear power plant. No, you don't. You don't have to build nuclear, and you don't have to build turbo fuel. You don't have to build rocket fuel. Rocket fuel is actually pretty easy if you want to build like a lot of power and you don't want to put a lot of effort into it. You can just get like 600 oil and like maybe 1200 sulfur, I think is the ratio. It's like 600 oil, 1200 sulfur, and 900 coal, I believe. But you also need some nitrogen, so you got to get the amount of nitrogen you need for that as well. And then you turn that into like 150 gigawatts of power, something crazy like that. So you use like a third of the amount of oil that I'm using to make like 2 times the power, something crazy like that. But I find that it's better to use oil than sulfur. So like if you can make 60 gigawatts with just oil, then just make 60 gigawatts with just oil. That's a much better solution than trying to do something that involves a lot of complicated logistics. Why am I... What? Oh, I must have got stuck underneath the rail somehow. That's weird. So yeah, sometimes you can just choose to not do complicated things whenever it's not necessary to progress. If you dread it and you just want to make progress, don't worry about building a turbo fuel plant. Don't worry about building a nuclear plant. Just build a diluted fuel plant instead, and it works out. If you want to build a complicated power plant, that's fine. But if you're feeling demotivated because you can't make it to phase 5, you can just focus on getting to phase 5. Diluted power is more than enough. So now I'm taking the plastic and rubber along the train network to this factory where I can build an electronics factory. And this was the first time this save file, this was my first save file in 400 hours where I was able to build a fully automated computer setup. Now I'm using plastic and rubber and caterium and copper, iron, coal, all the iron, coal, copper, caterium, the limestone, that was all close enough that it could be conveyor bust in. But eventually, in order to get past the phase 3 lump, I had to build a train to bring in plastic and rubber. Without that train bringing in plastic and rubber, I would have never made it past this wall. Eventually, I did add in a supercomputer manufacturer to this setup so that I can make supercomputers here for phase 4. Supercomputers are the easiest phase 4 component to make. I thought it would have been RCUs, but nope. Supercomputers are the only thing that don't necessarily require aluminum, and that makes them the easiest to set up. I did eventually start spaghettiing drones into everything, so this is all kind of a nightmare. There's the tier 9 stuff kind of just added to floating foundations. This is the starter base that you can see the transition that I made from trying to keep things neat and tidy and organized and actually try-harding the game, where I wasn't going for aesthetics, but I was going for organization. Looks all nice and neat, tidy. I really like it. Very happy with how it turned out, but it was taking too long to play the game this way. I got to phase 4 and I couldn't figure out how do I keep this energy, this vibe of doing things correctly and neatly, and get to a point where I can actually complete the phase 4 components. I decided to just rush, and it's a nice way to look at it because phase 4 is basically just getting this blender, taking your heavy modular frames from your starter base into a blender with some nitrogen and some aluminum and turning them into fused modular frames, taking that manufacturer over there and turning your computer stuff that you have at your computer factory into supercomputers, and then taking this manufacturer and taking some of the RCUs that you've built somewhere else. Like if you bring crystal in to make RCUs, crystal and aluminum, you bring that in to make RCUs, and then you combine the RCUs, radio control units, with the motors you've already made and some other components. I'm using the turbo electric motor recipe, so all I have to do is add in the ability to make electromagnetic control rods, which take in some, with the recipe I'm using high-speed connectors and rotors to make electromagnetic control rods, and then electromagnetic control rods combined with RCUs, motors, and rotors make turbo motors. So I'm making 1.5 turbo motors per minute, and I was duplicating them with sloops. and decided to stop because I'm not trying to box feed the elevator anymore, so I don't need to. Then, of course, I came over here and added cooling systems and heat sinks to the mix so that I could have the ability to make the buildings that required cooling systems. But yeah, this is kind of the Phase 4 part of the game. The part that was holding me back was essentially just this. It's one manufacturer there, an assembler there, there's an assembler there, a blender here, and a manufacturer there. That's it. That's Phase 4. Everything else was the stuff that I already built. That's what was holding me back from progressing through the game, was like a blender, 2 blenders, 4 manufacturers maybe, an extra 2 assembling machines. Of course, the entire ass crystal oscillator factory that I built over there, and the oil processing facility that's making the plastic and rubber. The thing that's complicated isn't the amount of buildings that are necessary to make the stuff you need. It is the interconnected logistics that are necessary to bring the products together. And for people who are stuck on Phase 4 like I was, the big hurdle to overcome is getting to the point where you can import and export materials from factories to other factories. I know that some people like the mega factory approach, where you just bring all the raw materials to one location to build a mega factory, and I do want to try that at some point. But the way the game kind of works, the way it's optimized, the way that helps performance, is that you build factories kind of all over the place, and then you bring the materials between them in order to get the process complete. So you can keep the stuff you've already built and then just use it to feed the next process. And the complexity comes from long distance logistics, not necessarily from how complicated it is to set this stuff up. Because fused modular frames, radio control units, turbo motors, cooling systems, they were all very intimidating whenever I was getting stuck in Phase 4, because I would look at what they would need and I would dread having to build a factory that made all that stuff. But you don't have to build a factory that makes all that stuff if you're already making that stuff in another factory. You just have to figure out how to effectively move it between factories. This is essentially box feeding, but having the robots box feed it for you instead of you box feeding it yourself. And it is one way to solve the problem. I think it's the most straightforward way to solve the problem, is by moving things between factories using automated processes, particularly drones. They're the best thing to move products around, like heavy modular frames or aluminum products. You move those around with drones. You don't necessarily move ore around with drones, even though there are some situations where you can do that. But if you get to the point in the game where you're feeling stuck and burned out, just try to figure out how to get products between factories, and that will get you past Phase 4. And then, of course, like I said earlier at the beginning of the video, once you are past Phase 4, the game is over, because Phase 5 is incredibly easy. And even Ada, I think, tells you whenever you're making it to Phase 5 that you should just keep producing the stuff that you made in Phase 4 to get through Phase 5. She's basically trying to give you a hint. All you need to do is keep the stuff that you've made already and use it to make the stuff that you need to beat the game. So don't worry about, like, you see a turbo motor. If you're still in the frame of mind where you see a product and you think, I'm going to build a factory that makes that product from raw material, you're not going to be able to go to something like turbo motors and find an area on the map that's perfect for making turbo motors and then go build a turbo motor factory there. What's more likely for people who are still beginners, the easier way to do that would be to find a place that has the additional materials that you need to add to what you've already built to make turbo motors. And then you build the factory that makes those additional items, and then move those additional items to where you've already built the other thing, and then combine them together and you get your turbo motors. If you do want to make a new factory that just makes turbo motors, you can. There are some areas on the map that, if you really look for them, they have some material nearby that can do that. But for general play, for people who don't have the entire map memorized and you're still starting out, it's far better to learn how to use long-distance logistics instead of trying to just go find these magical areas on the map where everything is just within arm's reach and you can make something as complicated as turbo motors in a single factory from raw materials. That also gets very repetitive and can drain you and burn you out, is rebuilding the same processes over and over and over again because you need the same beginning materials for every product. Like, turbo motors, at some point in its production, I believe, relies on heavy modular frames, I think. I don't know which part of the recipe require. I don't think it does, actually. It's not the turbo motors. There is one alternate recipe where you use pressure conversion cubes in it, and if you use that recipe, that technically will get heavy modular frames involved in the production of turbo motors. I guess that's not the greatest example, but you will have to make aluminum for your turbo motors. You'll also need aluminum for your fused modular frames. So if you're making a fused modular frame factory and a turbo motor factory, you're going to have to process aluminum at 2 different locations in those 2 factories. It's just better to make the aluminum casings and send the aluminum casings to the cooling system factory, and then send the aluminum casings to your turbo motor or your RCU factory, and then send the aluminum casings to your heavy modular frame factory, and then make your fused modular frames, your RCUs, and your cooling system separately. Then you can bring your cooling systems and your RCUs together with your motors and your rubber to make your turbo motors. Or if you use the turbo electric motor recipe like I do, you can bring your RCUs to where your motors and your rotors are, and you can make your electromagnetic control rods, which are really easy on site. I do highly recommend the turbo electric motor alternate recipe for people who want to simplify the logistics somewhat. So it's better, easier, and quicker to bring everything you've already used together than it is to try to find out how do I make a completely new factory for every single component that I unlock. It's not really effective. So if you want to get past that hump, you have to get over the aversion to using long-distance logistics. If you have to learn how to use trains to solve that problem, you can get over using trains. That will help. If you have an aversion to using really long spaghetti or very long conveyor buses, you may have to get over an aversion to using long conveyor buses, because there are 2 ways to solve the long-distance logistics problem. Either build everything in one location, mega factory style, which requires you to bring ore and other raw materials like nitrogen over long distance buses to the area you're going to build the mega factory. So that's how you solve the logistics. You just make everything next to each other, which requires you to bring all the raw materials together in one place, which means you're going to be transporting raw materials long distances. Trains are the best way to do that. If you don't want to learn how to use trains, you have to figure out how to use conveyor belts. Drones are not good for transporting ore. They're good for transporting nitrogen, so you can use drones for nitrogen. But if you want to transport things like rubber, plastic, or things that are needed in high volume, it's better to use a train for that. And if you get over the aversion to using trains, you can open up a whole lot of the world to you. And if you want to just use trains because you either don't want to use drones or you don't want to risk the drone bug messing up your save file, there's a bug in the game where drones can get stuck. Like, not like that, they're all waiting because their ports are occupied, but a drone will get frozen in the air, and it hasn't happened to me, so I don't know if it's a common enough bug to worry about if you're not really into drones. But drones can become bugged, so people might want to avoid using them. And if you want to use trains for everything, you basically just need to bring raw materials like ore, limestone, plastic, rubber. I don't recommend bringing oil unless you really want to. You can bring your crystal in on train. You just build a train network, get all your raw material together in one place, and then just build a big old factory. That's kind of the approach I use, because most of what I'm using is built in that factory, and I'm just importing a couple of things to that factory to finish off the production, like radio control units and aluminum are basically what I'm making somewhere else and bringing to the factory. And I've already torn down most of my temporary elevator part stuff that I was doing, so that factory was bigger. It was making not assembly director systems, it was making AI expansion servers. And I had like a big floating platform here that was using these iron nodes to help make some stuff that I needed to make previous elevator parts and stuff, but that's all already torn down. I had that copper node dedicated to making nuclear pasta. But yeah, once you get the ability to use drones, it does simplify spaghetti, because you can just use drones whenever you need to take a complicated part like an RCU from one half of the map to the other half of the map. You just have to make sure to set up some fuel for it, which I think the easiest fuel to set up for it is rocket fuel, because it's the most efficient, like oil-based fuel besides ionized fuel, which I don't think is worth it. You just make rocket fuel and use it for your drones. Technically, I think the best fuel to use for drones is either regular fuel, because you can make it out of nothing but oil, and you can make a lot of it and power drones with just oil, because you can also use some oil to make plastic containers to put the oil in. But If you only want to use a little bit of oil and a little bit of sulfur and a little bit of oil and a little bit of aluminum, you can use rocket fuel. And once you got a fuel system set up for your drones, and anytime you add a new product to your factory, you just have to add an import and export for the components that are necessary to make that thing. And I think if you use drones properly, it's a great way to simplify the logistics for the middle of the game. That's why they introduced drones at the same time they introduced aluminum, because that's basically how you deal with aluminum, is you use trains to get your aluminum ore to its processing, and then you use drones to take the stuff you're turning the aluminum into to where the aluminum is needed. Yeah, but there is no one way to play the game. You can still use conveyor buses and trains to transport everything in the game without even touching drones. But if you want to be the most effective with how you use your logistics, if you're going to use trains, you might as well transport ore to a centralized location and then build the components next to where they're needed. So, I've beaten the game. I've made this rant where I talk about how to get unstuck from Phase 4. The main motivation for doing that, despite not being, good at making videos or anything, is because I was expecting to beat the game and then burn out and stop playing, because that's what I do. I beat the game, I stop playing. I thought that I was going to not be motivated to continue the save file because I kind of gave up on making things look nice and just beat the game with spaghetti, which is supposed to be supposedly the wrong way to play the game. And I kind of overcame that mindset. Let me up. I'm just going to float. I overcame the mindset of thinking that there's a right way and wrong way to play the game, because I've always thought that when people say there is no wrong way to play the game, that's mostly just bullshit, because there's obviously a wrong way to play the game, because obviously it takes more effort to make things look nice, so that's a better way to play the game. And if it's a better way to play the game, it's the right way to play the game, right? That's how I used to think about it. And I thought that once I beat the game this way, I would be able to quit and then come back and start over sometime in the future, probably 6 months from now, after, everything's nice and stable and fixed. I would be able to come back, start over, and play the game right. And that's the infinite mindset that I've always had for every factory game that I play, is beat the game real fast, come back, and then I'll play it right next time. And I've never actually had a save file that I've played in a factory game where I got to the end and I was like, okay, I played the game right. And I don't know what that mindset, what the end goal of that mindset is. If you're playing the game correctly, are you insinuating that if you play the game correctly, you're going to get some sort of reward for it beyond what the game gives you for beating the game? Is my golden cup worthless because I didn't beat the game properly? I don't understand. I'm trying to rack my brain now that I've beaten the game, and I don't feel like I'm going to burn out, because, spoiler alert, I'm not going to start over. I actually want to keep playing. I'm really excited to keep playing, actually, and I'm just completely flabbergasted. I did not expect that I would be feeling as accomplished and willing to continue playing as I am. I really do want to keep playing the game. I don't have the urge to start over at all. And that's weird, because I have the urge to start over constantly while playing games. Not just factory games, but games in general. I always want to start over. And this is the first time in a video game where I don't want to start over, and it's after playing the game what I thought was supposed to be the wrong way. You're supposed to put effort into things and make them look nice, and you're supposed to not build spaghetti, and you're supposed to keep things organized and be aesthetic. And I did it quote-unquote wrong, and now I don't want to stop. And I do actually want things to look nice. I do want to build a correct factory. I do want to build the right way, but instead of... Let's see if I can get on top of this. Instead of having the correct way be the way you see YouTubers play the game, the real correct way to play the game is to play it in a way that keeps you motivated and makes you excited and feel like you want to keep playing. And that's the way I feel now, which kind of implies that I have been playing the game the correct way, which seems weird to me because it definitely doesn't... I'm not satisfied with the result from a visual perspective. I don't like the way the factory looks. From afar, it looks pretty interesting, but when you get up close and you see all the conveyor spaghetti, it's actually kind of bad. There's a train going by in real life right now. So I'm kind of at an impasse here because I really want to know how far I can take the save file now that I've beaten the game. And for the first time, I don't want to just tear everything down. I do want to tear this down, but I don't want to do it so bad that I'm going to do it before I have a replacement for it. I'm going to actually build a real factory, quote-unquote real factory, like this one isn't real. I'm going to build a real factory first and then tear all this down, but I actually am motivated to do that instead of giving up and quitting like I thought I would do, because I was like, I never beat the game. I never make it past phase 4. So I assumed that if I just beat the game the wrong way, that I would feel demotivated for cheating because I didn't cheat. But that's the way your brain kind of thinks about it. If you use box-fed assemblers instead of fully automated setups, and you don't fully automate certain things like weapons and ammunition. I never made an ammo factory. I still have a finite amount of ammo just sitting in a crate from when I box-fed an assembler with some sloops. And I think I'm more than halfway. Yeah, I've already used more than half of my turbo ammo. I used to have 2 full boxes of it. I don't have fully automated black powder. I don't have fully automated smokeless powder. I don't have fully automated gas masks. I don't have fully automated iodine filters. I don't have fully automated power shards. I don't have fully automated nobelisks. There's a lot of stuff I haven't fully automated. But, like, it kind of doesn't matter. I can make factories for those. Like, there's no reason why I have to do it at the beginning of the game. Why can't you do it at the end of the game? So the plan moving forward is to build the real base. I actually have like some signs over here where I'm going to try to rebuild my world. But for now, I'm kind of just basking in the victory of having beaten the game and like being really weirded out by the fact that I'm not just going to abandon all of this now. I'm kind of stuck with it because I thought I was going to stop, but now I'm not going to stop, so I have to look at it. Maybe looking at it will give me more motivation to, you know, replace it. I'm kind of working on trying to figure out what the long-term goal is, because I do want to get the golden nut. It's the last trophy that I need, and I'm at a point where I have about 8 million points per coupon, and I haven't bought anything from the shop that is like temporary. I've only bought permanent stuff like the carts and stuff, the boombox, all of these. I haven't bought any equipment besides the coffee cup. I had to buy 2 golden cups and 1 regular cup. I don't buy any of this stuff at all, so I haven't wasted any of my coupons on temporary stuff. I just use box-fed assemblers to generate the stuff that I need. So I still have like 400 coupons. I have 395 coupons, and another 5 I have exactly 400 coupons. A lot of my coupons are actually gained from animal remains. Like, you get a lot of tickets from animal remains if you keep dropping your animal remains off into a system. I actually generated so many tickets from animal remains that I just decided to stop using sloops on this stuff, because, like, I don't need it anymore, so who cares? It's still better to get rid of the remains so that they don't clog up my inventory, and I don't like seeing them floating in the world, so I still pick them up, but, like, I don't need them anymore. I also still have a slug set up. That's why I have so many power shards. I think I have 700 in there and a full dimensional depot, so I've got like 1,000 power shards still. Kind of crazy. And I am still getting the hard drives so I can finish getting all the recipes unlocked. But I have all of the actually useful recipes right now. Damn, this game is amazing. That's it. I am going to rebuild my world. I don't know if I'm going to make any more videos. I wanted to make this one just to say, hey, I beat the game. If you're struggling beating the game, make sure that you're getting your products between factories so that you can get past phase 4. And also, I wanted to provide a perspective that some people probably don't get to see very often, because it's not something that's common in the Satisfactory community, is somebody telling you to just go fast, use spaghetti, and don't focus on building the aesthetics. Because people, there's kind of a mindset on Reddit, not so much YouTube, but on Reddit, there is this mindset that playing the game wrong will lead to burnout, or you'll somehow regret it. I don't know what people are afraid of. If you play the game quote-unquote wrong, what is the consequence? Are they afraid that Coffee Stain Studios is going to break into your house and uninstall the game off of your hard drive and blacklist you so you can never download it and play it again if you play it wrong? Like, what are the actual consequences? I think that they believe that there's some sort of thing that will happen in your brain that if you play the game wrong, it will make you hate the game and you'll never play it again. And I can't predict how every person is going to respond to the situation, but if people go on the internet and say that, it's going to give people the impression that that's true, even if it's only true for that one specific person or a very small subset of people. I don't know how common that type of mental reaction actually is, that if you play a game wrong, you'll never play it again, or you'll somehow lose, or you'll face some sort of long-term consequence that's so dire you have to make sure you do everything in your power to avoid playing the game wrong. There's nothing wrong with playing the game wrong. Even if you accept the premise, which is already pretty flawed, that there is a quote-unquote wrong way to play the game. Even if there is a wrong way to play the game, there's no reason to not play it wrong. I do think that instead of thinking of playing the game right and wrong, we really should just adopt the mindset that there are different skill levels to the game, like beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert, master, and depending on what stage you're at, your factories are going to look a certain way. And early game spaghetti factories aren't necessarily playing the game wrong, they're just playing the game in a beginner way, like you're at a beginner skill level, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, whenever you start out any skill or any kind of thing that you learn how to do, you're going to follow a skill curve of beginner, intermediate, advanced, and so on. And you can't really expect to skip parts of that curve, at least not effectively skip parts of that curve. You have to be a beginner before you can become intermediate, and you have to be intermediate before you can become advanced, and you have to be advanced before you can become an expert, and you have to become an expert before you can master something. Like, you just have to go through the progression curve. And I think that a lot of burnout happens, at least for me. Like, I was examining my behavior and I was trying to figure out, why do I keep burning out? And I was looking at the patterns of my behavior to try to understand where I was messing up so that I can do better. And I feel like the main mindset that I had that was holding me back was I was, for some reason, holding the expectation that I should be better than I should have been. And I was trying to skip levels of progression I was trying to basically skip being a beginner or intermediate and go straight to being advanced. I was trying to skip those parts of the equation and go straight to YouTuber brain rot builder, like somebody who can make really big fancy factories without having to put the same amount of work and effort into getting to that skill level that the YouTubers with the brain rot. Like, I haven't routed my brain yet. I need to actually go through the phase of being somebody who's not no-lifing the game constantly before I get to a point where I've played the game enough that it's literally the only thing I can think about when I try to go to sleep. So, yeah, you do have to go through the point where you have giant circuit board factories before you can you got to go spaghetti, circuit board, and then clean factories after that. And I do know that if I did start the game over now, like I've beaten the game, I was going to build a factory here. If you've noticed this big foundation slab, I was going to build something there. Ignore that. I was going to fill that whole void in with concrete. That kind of abandoned that idea. I wasn't even using blueprints for that, so that's not blueprints. Like, if you come over here, a lot of this stuff is blueprints. I didn't use blueprints for that. That's just zooped. That was a mistake. I should not have done that. But if I started the game over, and I know at some point in the future I might start the game over, I would definitely do way better than I did, but that's purely because you get better at things as you do them. So I don't necessarily believe that if I started the game over, my save file would be better. It's not because I would be playing the game correctly, it would be because I'm just at a higher skill level. So because I'm at a higher skill level from having beaten the game, any new file that I start would just be better because I'm better at the game and I'm more skilled and I know what I'm doing. And it would almost be interesting to start a new file just to see how much better my new file would be, but I kind of want to just keep playing the game as it is because I want to build a ballistic warp drive factory and sink the ballistic warp drives to get enough coupons to earn the golden nut. Even though I probably don't even have to go that hard to get it, to be honest. It seems like it's not going to be that difficult. But yeah, that will be a future endeavor. For now, I am just glad that Project Assembly is complete. I have beaten the game. I am verified employee of the planet. I have the golden cup. I even have the golden card. I have the golden card as well. Look at it. It's not... Oh, it will let me put... I can put a thing in it. I don't think it's going to do anything, but what happens if I put the Employee of the Planet cup in the cart? Nothing. Hey, it's got a honky horn. I should probably take my hover pack off while I'm in it. Beep, beep. Yeah, I got the golden cart. I've got the golden cup. I've beaten the game. My pioneer's all happy. They have saved the day, I think. I don't want to spoil the ending. I think I've saved the day. Ada told me I saved the day. I don't know if I believe her. Whoop. Let's just say I helped Ada accomplish her goals. That's it. And now the only thing left to do is to basically do everything that I just did except better. And that's another thing, the mindset of playing the game correctly. There is a implication whenever you think that way. If you didn't play the game correctly and you go and you play the game correctly this time, if you do play the game correctly, does that mean that you no longer have to play the game because you played it correctly? Like, how can you justify continue playing the game if you can no longer improve, right? Like, if you just reach the point where you're building absolutely perfect factories that aren't flawed in any way because you're playing the game correctly, do you stop because you've already beaten the game and now you've done it perfect, or do you continue being absolutely flawless and perfect with no improvement whatsoever? It's just an interesting mindset to try to dissect and actually examine, because sometimes we hold ourselves back with certain ways of thinking and you don't really realize how silly that way of thinking is until you kind of examine it in a more objective way. I'm just going to end the video now. I can't think of any way to outro it. And there's a real train. And real actual train.